So our guest today, Mark Coxon, is a Western Regional Sales Director for HD Distributing, 20-plus year veteran of the AV industry, and general man about the blogosphere. I hope he wouldn't mind me calling him that. Let's talk to him. Mark, come on in. Good day, sir. How are you? Excellent. I don't have any audio from you, Mark. So, do you know sign language?
No, sorry about that. No, I'm in. Sorry, it's a gloomy,
That's
it's
all
a
right.
gloomy, rainy day. Gloomy, rainy day here in California. It's a little dark in here, but yeah, no, happy
Oh,
to join you. Happy
I
to join
was
you.
I was led to understand that it never rained in California, that the crops were watered by water that just seeps up through the ground, so you can always enjoy perfect weather. Is that not true?
Magical agriculture fairies. That's the term.
Excellent, excellent. So let's dive in. Right, you wrote a piece with an awfully provocative title. AV supply chain disruption. Is it our own fault? Any of you who want to read it on your own, go ahead. There's a link below. Check it out after the show. Come on, we'll tell you what it's about. Why don't you first lay it out for us? What's your argument? First of all, the title was a question. Is your conclusion that it is a little bit our own fault? And if so, why?
So yeah, my conclusion is that it is in a little bit of a way, right? So when we look at supply chain and when we look at what's happening right now with us not being able to get gear, my question for you is, look in the rack and see how many chipsets you need to run that pile of gear. And if you look at that and think how many of those pieces could be consolidated, how many of those pieces could be run with something else, was there a way that we could have stayed ahead of this curve and became a little more efficient in the way that we produce systems and not be so dependent on as many processors, as many pieces of hardware in our systems? And that was part of my conclusion. The other part of my argument there was that we've kind of, in a lot of ways, we've taken our integration firms and we've backed them into a corner, being very dependent on one or two suppliers to deliver our systems. And just like we want to look out and say, well, geez, manufacturer, didn't you have a backup plan for chipsets if your main producer went belly up? You didn't have a backup plan for that. And I would say turn that question on ourselves. Why don't we have a contingency plan for if one of our main suppliers can't get us gear? Why have we kind of backed ourselves into that corner so much? So
Sure. Yeah, good stuff. Um, so how did we get here? Right? If AV has been building these walled gardens for all these years. Is there an advantage to that? I mean, I can see the advantage to that a manufacturer might see for themselves, but is there an advantage to the AV consumer, or is this just selfish behavior? How did we get here?
I yeah, I mean, I don't blame the AV industry, wholly for the motivation of how we got here. It just kind of happened that way. I mean, we worked with brands in the beginning. The brands could do things that other brands just couldn't do, right? So some of our manufacturers that make control systems, they just made products that nobody else made, and we needed them in order to make these systems work. As time went on, that environment got more competitive, and there were more manufacturers that could do those things. But what happened is, the manufacturers put a lot of pressure on us, right? They start building out ecosystems. They start giving us
Hmm.
quotas to keep our rates and all those things. They get us deep into having all of our engineers slated in doing one programming language. And because we don't have this kind of level playing field of standards where if you can program one system, you can program another, um, your whole business model is built on this manufacturer. And we did that because the margins were protected, because customers couldn't shop, because we were able to make high margins on hardware and equipment. But unfortunately, over time, um, that may have created some liability for us and not just the
Yeah.
advantages that we used to get.
It's funny. Before the show, there was a particular C word that I asked Mark not to say. It's fun. I think he's avoiding all C words now as a result. That's funny.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I totally get that. Right. It starts out. with just as you said, making things that nobody else is making, and then next thing you know, there's an ecosystem around that, and nobody else wants to standardize to his thing. So without starting afresh, with building towards standardization, it can be a real challenge. But I also wonder, to what degree are the system designer and integrator community complicit? You mentioned in the article, I'm gonna quote from you here. Teams and Zoom was not our idea. The consumer had to grab the industry and pull. Um, that resonated with me. It reminded me of, I'm going to go ahead and say it. We don't mind saying it. I used to work at Crestron, and I was in charge of their digital media product line. A big part of that product success was it was out there when nobody else had a digital video solution. And what I saw from my seat was integrators and designers sometimes being dragged into that future. They said, you know what, we understand analog. It's straightforward for us. Digital has all these, HDCP and EDID problems. We don't want it. And I saw their end customers drag them to it. It really was a reflection to me of what you said here about Teams and Zoom. Is there something about the AV industry that, and this feels weird to me, we're an industry about sort of advanced technology and latest and greatest, and yet there's something in us that doesn't want to move to the next thing. What do you think? I'm talking a lot.
No, no, yeah, it's good. I mean, I don't think the motivations for that are all bad. I think integrators want to deliver solid, solid systems to their customers. And the
Yeah.
history had proven at those times that the solid way to do video conferencing was to use, Cisco Tandberg and Polycom, and that was the solid AV way to make sure you had good quality of service, that things were secure, that they were encrypted. Maybe
Yeah.
they had clients that those things were priorities for, and they didn't want to change their whole business model to go to the cloud, right? I also think our revenue models are built on hardware. One of the biggest,
Yes.
I think, challenges we have as integration firms in moving into this new world of virtualized equipment is, if you go into a virtual control system where you charge your customer $299 a room a year. How do salespeople get paid? How do engineers get paid? How does the company monetize that? How do you create a revenue plan, or how do you know what the retention is going to be year over year? So all of those things in a subscription service model are a lot different than running a business based on a hardware based model. So I think some of that has been part of the hesitation as well. Is it takes a reimagination of what success looks like in an AV integration firm and what revenues need to come in to do that. And so, it's harder for salespeople to talk about. It's harder for executives to restructure payment plans and pay plans for their salespeople. So I don't think it all stemmed from bad motivation per se.
No.
I just think that
Hmm.
a lot of times we're running a business, and as we're running that business, we're trying to keep up, and we don't have a lot of time to work on what the future looks like.
Sure. I think one of the I agree with everything you said, and yet a thing that I worry about for sort of the sake of our industry is that kind of conservatism is also what opens the opportunity for disruption. For somebody to come in and say, I figured out the better way, and just suddenly take everybody's lunch. So what should the integrators, even the manufacturers, what should they be doing to try and solve some of those problems, right? How do you pay a salesperson, on a recurring subscription instead of on a box sale? I
Yeah,
feel like somebody somewhere has solved that. There are subscription services. I guess Netflix doesn't have
yeah.
doesn't have salespeople in that sense, but we know subscriptions can work. So what does the integrator need to be doing to make sure that he's not the one that gets disrupted in the next few years here?
Yeah, so I mean, I think number one, we need to reduce our dependency on hardware, and I think supply chain has shown us that. I think we need to move into products that are standards based. I know that's a weird bad word in AV for some reason, but if we can move into products that are standards based and are cross compatible across brands, because right now where
Hmm.
we're pigeonholed is a lot of times we're stuck in an ecosystem, and if we can't get that one brand, we're dead in the water. But if we're using a standard or a
Yeah.
protocol that a lot of brands use, and that there's an organization that controls the quality of, right, then we have a lot better chance of being able to switch to another manufacturer if our primary goes down, and still be able to deliver our systems to clients in a way that we're comfortable with. So I think we need to be doing that. And I think we need to be looking at other industries. Like you said, maybe Netflix doesn't have salespeople doing a subscription model, but guess what? Security companies do. And security companies have been
Hmm.
selling on a subscription model for years. I mean, they sell monitoring contracts and they give away hardware for free to get the monitoring contracts. There are examples of companies that have made that switch. A lot of the hardware companies, like IBM, used to be mainly a hardware company. IBM is now more of an AI, R&D and software based company, right? Like their main revenues are no longer from selling mainframes and RS-6000s. It's from selling services to customers, and they sold off their low end hardware divisions. Lenovo bought all of the
Yep.
ThinkPad, Think Center stuff from IBM because IBM saw that was a 3 to 5 point venture going forward, and it wasn't worth pursuing. So I think we need to really rethink our, I guess, our reliance on hardware and look at ways that we can start to deliver systems more efficiently that aren't as dependent on the black box.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think you called out the example of immersive in your article, right? I remember meeting those guys when they'd first developed their product, and it was a software solution, and it could do some really cool stuff. And I remember giving them what I thought was the unfortunate news. I was like, guys, this looks amazing, but I'm just going to warn you, you can't sell software to AV. You need to put this in a box and sell the box. And I think they heard that feedback enough, and that's where it went. It's tough to it's tough to push against, the way that any market works, even when there is
Yeah.
maybe a better way.
Well,
Are
I
there any
think I
examples?
think it.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I think it's encouraging. We are seeing companies like QSC and Shure and bring in their DSPs into software space with IntelliMix and the QSys, like
Yeah,
the QSys
yeah.
system. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that now, and so I think those are trends that we need to support and to invest in learning. Right, like we need to make sure that our people are up on those type of systems, and I think over time we'll see more and more of those hardware um, boxes become services that run as virtual machines on one larger box.
I completely agree. In fact, my next question was going to be, are there examples of folks in AV doing this the right way? And so you didn't need to hear the question. You jumped right there. I was hoping you'd bring up QSC in particular. I've always had my eye on them and been impressed with the way that they're taking things that could just be software and actually making them just software. Because why
Mm-hmm.
not? There's this big trend that I see, that anybody who looks at technology can see, which is, eventually a certain application, whether it's moving audio or video or being Netflix, right, gets to a point where a regular computer can do the job. You don't need specialty hardware. You don't need, purpose-built chips. It's just a question of when are the CPUs fast enough to finally do that job. And it always
Yeah.
makes me happy to see people in the AV industry and understanding and embracing that, even despite some of the marketing challenges that come with it. So,
Yeah.
Mark, we've got one question from our audience at least already, but I'm going to push that off for time and say join us for the after show, and we'll bring Mark with us. So sit tight, and we'll ask him all of your questions when we get to the after show.